Okay, so we have our input file getting open. We have our loop going through and looking at all the lines. So what we're going to take a look at now is the next step, which is that we need to kind of analyze what is in the file and break things out so that when we pass it off to the REST server, it knows, what to do. And keep in mind, we're using a REST server at the moment that's already written. So it's one of the reasons that we've got to conform to a certain thing. But so what we're doing right now is we're replacing a Go application with a Rust application that does the same thing. And we're going to, I'll show the Go code once we're done with the Rust version to kind of see how things line up between the two applications or two programming languages. So at this point, what we have is I've created a mutatable counter variable, which is an integer that we're using to count. And basically what that's going to do is it's going to keep up with the variable. So I'm going to have a variable called request, or I think is what we called it, or record. And that record is going to have an integer right after it. So it'll be record 1, record 2, record 3 that will keep up with how many parts are being passed over through this REST call. So we have a mutatable counter, we have a mutatable request, which is just a string that we're using to build up the request, and then a temp variable that's actually going to hold the name of the record. So it'll be record 1, record 2, record 3. So we're just using those as we go through. Now, our for loop is the same as what we had earlier. Now, one of the things that I've done here is I've added an st variable. And this is something that's a little bit, it takes a little bit to get your head wrapped around what's going on. But so I created an st variable that is a string, and I'm setting it equal to line.unwrap. Well, line is getting set up here in the for loop, and it's a return variable for reader. And what it ends up returning is a result type. It's not a string. It looks like a string, but it's actually a result type. And so in order to get to that item as a actual string so that we can work with it, we have to continue to do this line.unwrap. And in the last video, I covered what unwrap does. And essentially it's taking whatever the return is, in this case is a result, and it's unwrapping it to get the okay part of it so that it can set it to whatever it is that we're wanting to set, whatever type we want to set it to. Now, in this case, I want to set it to a string type. And so I do that. I say line.unwrap, and I'm setting it equal to st. But here's the tricky part, is that in Rust, whenever you set one string or one variable equal to another variable, what ends up happening is the first variable, in this case line, goes away. You're essentially changing ownership from the line variable to the st variable. And this is one of the powerful things about Rust, is that it's trying to make sure that memory is at an absolute minimum all the time. And so it looks at it and says, well, you've reused this variable, and therefore you must not need it again. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of line, and now we're going to be working with st. And so that's kind of important, because as you go through the code, you can no longer refer to line because it doesn't exist anymore. It's actually been changed over to st. Now, you can get around this by doing this a little bit different, but I'm not going to get into that right now. But that's the default behavior of how this is going to work. So st becomes the line that we just read out of the file. So then the next thing, now I can start to treat it like an actual string variable, and I don't have to do anything special. So what I'm doing now is I'm saying if the current line is equal to our version, then we're just going to continue. We're going to skip all the code and go on and get the next line, because we don't really care. And so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to look down here, and we're going to say if st equals $TP. This is what we did earlier. I think I covered this earlier. We're telling it that we don't import a complete price file. So this is all the new code, I think, except for what I just mentioned above. So what we're doing now is we're saying if st, if it does not equal a 0 and the length of it is greater than 0, that means I've got something on this line that I'm going to be working with. Then we're going to go into this block of code. So the first thing it does is it says I need to set a record key, and I think, so it says record key is going to be a string type, and we're going to set it equal to the st variable, which is a string, and we're going to read from the first character, the 0 position, and we're going to read 2 characters. So that gets me the first 2 lines of that file. Now let's jump out here real quick and take a look at what actually is inside this file. So the first line you'll notice is a capital T, and that tells me that this is the beginning of a record. And you'll notice that after that, we still have the same T, but it's lowercase. And this is just the way the company that designed this, they made this work in the early days. So all of these lines are all part of this record. So as I'm reading through here, I'm looking for another TE, another capital letter to designate that I'm on a new record, and that is going to tell me to go do something different or to start building another record for this particular interface. So what I'm doing here is I'm grabbing those first 2 characters. I need to know what they are. So I grab the first 2 characters, and then because when I grab these, they don't actually create a string. They create an array or an str. It's a different type of string variable, which I think is a vector. And so I can't assign just this to my string variable of record key. So I have to use the conversion type or the function to tell it that I want to convert it to a string, which is 2_string. So I'm basically taking the vector type that I'm getting, converting it to a string, putting it in record key. So now record key holds the first 2 characters of that line. So then I come in here and I say if new record key. Well, this is a function that I wrote, and so I'm going to jump down here to the bottom. We'll take a look at what it does. And so this thing comes in, and this is code copied out of the old Go code, which was originally written in Java. So this thing has taken quite a progression of languages over the years. But this is the original code. And so when we come in here, you can see that record key is a string, and we're going to return a Boolean. We're going to return a true or a false. So then I say let r string. So we're declaring another variable called string type called r, and we're setting it to the first character of that particular line. And so at this point, it's reading from the 0 position, the first element, and we're going to read 1 character, again converting it to a dot string, and then we go through here and look to see if it equals this, or this. And then if it does, we return true, telling us that we're on a new record. Otherwise, we're going to return false. We're not on a new record yet. And so the first obvious thing that really could be fixed here is that I'm receiving a string here. I don't really need, I don't think that, let's see, I'm going to clean this up a little bit because I think that we could just say record key, and then we could come back in here. Whoop. All right, and then I messed up there. All right, so is that right? Record, nope, I got an R over here. Didn't do a very good job there. Okay, so we have this fixed. So now let's jump back up here. And the reason that I'm looking at this is record key, once we use it in this function call, let me make sure we don't ever refer to it again. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to have this thing go ahead and convert this to only grab that first character, because we're not doing anything with the second character anyway. So all this is going to do is go ahead and grab the first character and pass it into the array, into the function, and we'll be done. We don't have to do any other stuff. So that looks to see if we're on a new record. Then we come down and we start looking at the counter. Now, the first field, the first thing that we're working with, we're really not going to be working with counter yet, because counter is already set to 0 from above when we initialized it, and we're not incrementing it unless we determine that we're on a new record. So all I'm doing here is making sure that we are indeed on a new record. We've moved over to record 1 now. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to write all of the stuff that we've been compiling about the first record. I'm going to go ahead and write it into the URL, which is going to be part of our REST stuff. Now that's going to be the next video, is where we're going to start getting into actually how to communicate with the REST server. So I've just put a note here, a little pseudocode, to let me know that this is where I'm going to plug in the REST server code. So what I'm actually doing with the field, the thing that we just built up, you're not seeing here because I haven't put it in yet. But that's where that code's going to go. So then we clear out the request variable. That variable, again, is holding the whole record. So if we jump back out here, we're looping through each of these lines, and as we're building up a record. And so once we get to this record, we're going to turn around and write all of the stuff that we dug out of the file for the previous record. We're going to write it into the URL so that we can pass it off to the REST server. So that's essentially what is happening here. And so then we increase our counter at that point. Now, Rust does not have a counter ++ designation. So if you're going to increment something, the quickest way is counter +=, and then whatever number you want to add to it. And then here, you'll notice that I'm setting temp equal to the word record, and then I'm grabbing whatever counter is. So the previous record was called record 0. Now I'm turning around and setting one equal to record 1, and then it'll be record 2, and so on. And then and that's all that happens if we're on a new record. And if we're not on a new record, what we're going to do is we're going to take request, which is our string that we're building up all these different lines, and we're going to set it equal to itself plus a pipe symbol plus whatever st is, which is our current line that we're working with. So it's going to grab that whole line and add it to the request variable. So that is essentially what is happening. And then I'm going to come down here for testing. I'm going to swap this over to showing request. Well, actually, it won't really do any good at the moment because it's going to, or let's see, that is outside of the whole for loop. So if we were to put this here, that should give us, because that's happening inside of that being on a record. And let's see, request equals that plus that. So we'll see what that does. So now I'm going to jump out. We're going to copy our input file that we need, and then we're going to run our code. And we've got a problem here, request equals blank blank. So expected structure string, found string. So, and some of this stuff I'm not totally getting yet. For some reason, I think you have to use there's a function to reset this. And I'll look that up in the next video and try to get that figured out. But I think that is what is going on there. Whoops. Or let's see again. So request plus rest-do. So again, okay, now we have another issue, and this is going to fall back on what my earlier conversation was, which is that whenever you use a variable to set it equal to some other variable, it no longer exists. And so the compiler is warning me here that I am passing in the actual variable, and so it's saying to consider borrowing. And so instead of passing in the actual variable, what we want to do is pass in the address to that variable. I'm not sure exactly if this is going to solve the entire problem. Yeah, because now we use of possibly uninitialized request. So the so what we could do, I think, is to say let rest equal rest, maybe, or request, and see it's going to move it. The value moved here in previous iteration of loop. So I don't want to make the video 10 miles long while I'm figuring out this stuff. And really, this is probably the thing about Rust that I'm still trying to get my head wrapped around is it treats variables in the way that it moves and takes ownership of things. It's completely new to me. I've never seen a language that actually did things like this. So I'm still trying to get my head wrapped around exactly what is going on. Like, for example, right here, when we are passing in, this ampersand is actually the and symbol is representing the address of this. It's a reference to ST, and how this is actually working at the moment, and or if it's working, I don't know yet. So I got to do a little bit more research on this, and I'll talk about it some in the next video that I do when we actually start getting into the rest stuff once I figure that out, because I don't want to sit here and have to research all this stuff while we're doing the video. So we'll do that in the next video, and then we'll continue on to building the client rest side of this server, so that we can actually get this thing into production and see if it works.